Alright, welcome to this video. I'm going to be explaining 5 players I am not drafting next year in fantasy football. Now, I get this is way too early rankings, and the rankings are via fantasypros.com. I know the rankings might be different in your leagues, and this player's drafted lower, this player's drafted higher, but I'm going off these rankings, and I'll let you know who's around each player and who you're drafting them over for each of them. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first player we're going to be talking about is T. Higgins, taken at number 18th overall and as the wide receiver 11. Now, T. Higgins kind of had what you consider a breakout season this year. First time averaging over 16 points a game. He still only played 12 games, but honestly, that 16 points game was very ugly, considering that he had only 3 games over 20 points, but those games were 29, 29, and 40, which kind of inflated his stat line a little bit, because he also had really low lows as 6.9, 4.3, and 9.3. Yes, it's not as bad as some other lows, but when you're playing in one of the best passing offenses in the league, I know you have Jamar Chase, who just won the Triple Crown, but he's on their best corner, and T. Higgins still gets a lot of targets. He's got 6, 10, 14, 7, 8, 13, 10, 5, 8, 11, 12, 5. He should be making a lot of production out of those target numbers. And the other thing I'm worried about is where he's going to go in free agency. Now, if he goes anywhere besides the Bengals, it is a massive downgrade in that passing offense. Joe Burrow might just be the best pure passer in the league. I mean, he had the most passing yards this season. That offense was on fire, especially being down a lot in games. So I think that if T. Higgins leaves Cincinnati, you cannot draft him in the second round of your fantasy leagues over players such as Christian McCaffrey, such as Drake London, Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers. I just don't think that you take T. Higgins that high. Alright, now we're going to go to our next player, who is Jaden Daniels. And now I know I'm going to get a lot of stick for this. Number 32 overall, QB3. Why aren't we drafting Jaden Daniels? The reason I'm not drafting Jaden Daniels has nothing to do with his production last season. His production last season was really good. Only had 3 games under 10 points, 2 of which being because he had to leave the game for injury. He had multiple games over 30 points. Week 16 and 17, which are the fantasy playoffs, he had 34.4 and 31.8 points. Huge games. He had 5 touchdowns in that game against Philadelphia. My problem with Jaden Daniels arises with a sophomore slump. He just made the conference championship. He's established himself as an elite quarterback in this league. Now, that means that teams are going to play against his skills. They're really going to look at every single detail of Jaden Daniels' resume and try and pick out his game, which is why I think he can definitely get over it. But next year might be a struggle for Jaden Daniels compared to other quarterbacks. You're drafting Jaden Daniels as the quarterback 3 over guys like Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow. I would rather have Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow over Jaden Daniels next year. Jalen Hurts, just because he knows the NFL. He's going to pretty much still put up consistently with tush pushes, all that rushing upside, and Joe Burrow just has all this passing volume that he's still going to be consistent with. This is also not barring injury at all. But yeah, I think Jaden Daniels could take a sophomore slump. Not that he's not a good quarterback. It's more as in people are going to game plan for him, and he needs time to get used to people game planning him. The third player we're going to be talking about is Zay Flowers, taken at number 39 overall and the wide receiver 21 off the board. Now, you look at Zay Flowers, and it seems like he had a pretty good year. Pro Bowl receiver, team made to the divisional round, number 1 wide receiver target for Lamar Jackson. But when you really get into the niche numbers, he had 12.3 fantasy points a game, which, does that scream top 20 wide receiver? Yes, he could have another really good season, or he could have another jump in production. But if you look at his game log, he only had 3 games over 20 points a game. And he had 1 game at 19, so he was close. And 1 game at 18.5. So basically, you have 5 games where this guy's boomed. 1 game where 15.3, kind of middle of the park. And then every other game, he is under 11.5 fantasy points. He's gotten under 10 fantasy points 6 times. And are you really going to want to draft a guy like that over someone like Cortland Sutton, who was super consistent in the second half of the year? DK Metcalf had some bad games, but also has huge upside, a lot better than Zay Flowers. George Pickens also with the upside. Jerry Jeudy was a monster. Jordan Addison, Marvin Harrison, who is surprisingly more consistent than Zay Flowers was. Jameson Williams, Khalil Shakir. These are guys that you're not going to want to draft under Zay Flowers. He's also being drafted in the same range as Rashee Rice, who is the wide receiver 20, 1 place above him, Devontae Adams, and DJ Moore. If you would tell me last year, at the beginning of the year, that Zay Flowers and Rashee Rice are on the same level, I would have called you very stupid. And I'm not taking Zay Flowers anywhere near wide receiver 20. I'd take him maybe at wide receiver 30. All right, the 4th player we're going to talk about is Kenneth Walker III. Now, Kenneth Walker, he's a good couple seasons for Seattle, but the issue I'm having with Kenneth Walker is his production later in the season. He played 12 games this year and averaged 16.5 fantasy points, the most by 3 fantasy points that he's ever averaged. However, his yardage average came down 3.7. His rushing yards came down only 573 compared to 1,050 and 905. He did get a lot more receptions, and he only was when he was targeted 53 times and caught 46 balls compared to the other 2 years where he played 4 more games but yet caught a lot less balls. But the issue I'm having with Kenneth Walker is that his stats are very heavily skewed towards the front half of the season, and you can see this in his other 2 seasons as well. So let's start with this. Week 1 through 7, he played 5 games and had 18, 33, 14, 21, and 23 points. And after week 7, he didn't get over 14 points once. 8, 13, 13, 13, 6, 13. Didn't get over that. You look at 2023. First 7 weeks, right? 10, 18, 30, 13, 17, 13. Not a bad stretch, right? And then towards the rest of the season, you only have 3 games over 15 fantasy points. You also have games of 8, 2, 2, 9, 6, and 9. And then you look at 2022. 2022 is where he was a rookie. Started slow. I think he was under Chris Carson at this time. But this was the year he retired, I think. But you can prove me wrong if I am. And he had a decent end to the season. But 2023 and 2024, he's honestly taken a regression from that rookie season, especially towards the end of the year. Is that a guy that you want on your roster towards the end of the year? A guy who's going to get you 6 points in week 13 and then be out until the fantasy semifinals and only get you 14? I say only as in like it's bad, but he's not as good, and he's very boom in the beginning of the season, but worse at the end. The other issue I have with him is Zach Charbonnet, who played a lot better than Kenneth Walker did. He had, despite not being the starting back for most of the season, he had the same amount of 17 plus point games he had one less 17 plus point game than Kenneth Walker had, despite not being the starting back. Plus, he had that monster 38.3 point game. Zach Charbonnet could definitely make this a running back by committee between him and Kenneth Walker, or he could just take the job outright, you know? And taking Kenneth Walker at about the time when you're taking James Cook, Alvin Kamara, Chuba Hubbard, Joe Mixon, Ashton Genty, Isaiah Pacheco, David Montgomery, these are guys that I would honestly take over Kenneth Walker in a heartbeat. The last guy we're going to talk about in this video is James Conner. Now, James Conner had a very good season this year, especially towards the end of the playoffs before he got injured. 14, 15, 16, he had 22, 30, and 26 points. He also sprinkled in two 19 points to start the season, the 17er, another 22er, a couple of 15s, and you know, that puts up a very solid fantasy season, averaging 15.9 points per game. And really the issue why that it was very skewed, because you had Detroit, where he had 3.5 points, Green Bay, where he had 6 points, and the game against the Rams, where he went off injured and had 2 points. So realistically, if you take those points out, he's probably averaging close to 18 points a game, right? And that's a solid where you want to be. And I'll tell you right now, I drafted a lot of James Conner last year. In my redraft alone, I drafted James Conner, Chris Godwin, Cortland Sutton, and Derrick Henry for steals for where they were drafted. And the issue I have with James Conner is he's getting older. He suffered a bad injury at the end of the year. The Cardinals aren't looking like the greatest offense in the world right now. And Trey Benson, once again, the second string back, also had a couple of good performances this year as a rookie. And I think that if James Conner gets hurt again next year, and not at the end of the year where he has to miss time, I think that Trey Benson could take this starting job and run with it. I think that, he's a rookie, he's younger, and James Conner could definitely start slowing down soon, because he's not like that Derrick Henry type of player where he could just mow through guys like crazy and not get hurt. He's going to get hurt eventually, and if it's early in the season, I see Trey Benson at least making this a running back by committee. So, just to recap, we got T. Higgins taken at number 18 overall, Jaden Daniels at number 32, Zay Flowers at 39, Walker at 44, and James Conner at 55. These are the guys that I'm not trying to take at their ADPs, because there are players on the same wavelength as them that are better and that I trust a lot more. And these guys are guys that definitely still could do good. If T. Higgins has a 14, 15 points per game season at whatever team he's on, good for him. Great year for him. But if you're taking him at the beginning of this, or at the end of the second round, or close to middle of the second round, expecting him to be kind of taking another leap and being that 18, 19 points per game guy, but also staying healthy, I don't see that happening. And same goes with all these other guys. I think that they're going to underperform expectations, but still they could be good. I think that's it. So remember, these are way too early ranks. Let me know in the comments which player I forgot, or which player that I mistakenly put in here. But yeah, subscribe.